morning, I'm Isaiah Brymick, and today I'll be reading for you my paper, Epistemological Evolution in a Post-Cultural World, Problematizing Mythic Construction. Something that Angela Carter once said, "I'm in the demythologizing business," has stuck in my thoughts like a burr. 3 works down the rabbit hole of Angela Carter, Shadow Dance, The Magic Toy Shop, and Heroes and Villains, we have enough time and material to tease out the subtler aspects of her writing. Throughout these books, she's been playing with various myths and allegories as tools to help explore her point of view. She dips her toes into the cultural malaise of a relativist world in Shadow Dance, but then outright cannonballs into myth, exploring the mythological divine and its bearing on patriarchy in The Magic Toy Shop. Yet in writing Heroes and Villains, Carter grows gills and dives to a depth beyond simply using myths and allegories. She begins to actively explore the mythologizing impulse and its impact on Western storytelling. This epistemological shift in Carter's writing reflects a fascinating evolution in her thinking, and is the subject of this paper. Examining and clarifying this evolution will provide a useful knowledge base for examining Carter's motives as we read the rest of her work, where she begins the true business of demythologizing. Carter begins her forays into the world of myth somewhat hesitantly, compared to her later work at least, in the novel Shadow Dance. The primary role of mythologizing engaged here is a sort of intertextual overlay emphasizing the ambiguity of reality, especially for the protagonist Morris, a man constantly seeking to become a citizen of the real world, a place where there was black and there was white, but no shadows." End quote. His anxiety about the validity of his perceived reality haunts the novel, revealing Carter's concern with the interplay between experience and perception, reality and text. According to an excellent extrapolation of various illusions in Carter's early novels by Jacqueline Pearson, quote, Morris's world is apprehended through a jumble of literary allusions and misquotations that entirely fail to help him negotiate its ambiguities, but instead mislead him with their myths. This reveals the way Morris's reality is comprised of cultural and literary fragments, which he clings to and mythologizes and attempts to ascribe meaning to his reality. In the end, he cannot resolve this tension between his shadowed reality and the black and white objectivity he seeks, collapsing back into his relationship with Honeybuzzard. Morris's doppelganger in Shadow, Honeybuzzard embraces the negative capability that caused Morris such paralyzing anxiety. He's at home in ambiguity and in shadow. He breathes and manipulates fragments as a tool for navigating a world that he sees as completely relative, once stating, "Believe what you want to believe. What you want to believe is the truth." End quote. He exists as a sort of allegory for mythic construction itself, a collection of masks and artifice with nothing at its core. Honey is always collecting disguises and facades. His room is a crystallization of the personality Honeybuzzard presented to the world. End quote. A frightening collection of junk jokes, cultural flotsam, and decay, yet is decorated in this willfully exotic fashion entirely to please himself. End quote. He artificially constructs a mythic personality, yet paradoxically does so only to please himself. This problematizing of mythic construction and aphorisms foreshadows a key part of Carter's evolution that will return, wreathed in irony and acerbic critique of Rousseau's Noble Savage later on in Heroes and Villains. The middle sibling of the novels we have studied, The Magic Toy Shop, utilizes myths in a dramatically more aggressive manner. In this novel, Carter submerges us readers in a dream state of interpretation, setting us up for surreal, shifting interactions, yet never breaks from the mundane. I want so badly to call the prose style in this novel magic realism. Melanie's descent into and subsequent flight from the garden, men with ballet-like grace and lupine smiles, a boy happily lost at sea, and a toy shop full of caged birds. Yet Carter, white-knuckled, refuses to relinquish the mundane. Instead, this text inhabits a fundamentally surreal location, sandwiched between realism and magic realism. Carter's is the realm of the allegory, the magic isle where all metaphors are birthed. Carter meticulously weaves layers of metaphor and intertextuality together, transmuting mundane setting and plot into the surreal. We recognize the place, the structures, England during wartime, orphans being sent to an unknown uncle. Yet Carter twists and subverts this familiarity constantly. Like Melanie and her siblings on the drive to their uncle's, we are carried by Carter into darker and stranger territory. Round every bend in the text, we expect to finally find the point where Carter breaks from reality. Yet again and again, Carter instead dances eerie waltzes on the brink of mundanity, leaving us off balance and uncomfortable in a sea of vignette-like allegorical dreams. Because of this, reading Carter requires special attention on the part of the reader. Extra care must be taken to keep in mind that the imagery she employs is not arbitrary, but rather is almost always a rabbit hole into deeper literary tunnels, or one of Western culture's uglier myths. As such, the reader must learn to recognize and anticipate Carter's allegories, if they wish to grasp the full import of her text. To pull on a single thread of allegory in the magic toy shop is to tug scarf after scarf out of the voluminous sleeves of a magician. So closely are her allegories interwoven, until, with a final yank, we expose a kind of mythic superstructure, or a mythic superskeleton, a meta-narrative Bildungsroman layered over the story. Throughout the novel, characters, but especially Finn, seem to flicker, to fleetingly phase out of reality and into their mythic significance. Though we're never given a leash to explore the thoughts in Finn's head in the same way that we do Melanie's, it's easy to establish Finn's role as a secondary protagonist of the novel. He's given more focus and presence than anyone other than Melanie, and carries just as many, if not more, mythic identities as her. His role is primarily split into the mirror personas of Adam and Lucifer and the cultural myth established by Milton's Paradise Lost. This creates a dramatic tension in Finn's character. He's set up by Uncle Philip, an Ur-patriarch of Old Testament magnitude, to couple with Melanie's Eve. Clearly sees this as an opportune match himself, and for the most part of the novel, actively flirts with her. Yet Finn is unwilling to fill the role of obedient Adam prescribed for him by Uncle Philip. When sent to help Melanie rehearse her role as Leda, Finn reacts volatilely with the prospect of the pair actually having sex, because he knows that to do so would cement his role as Adam and empower Philip as puppet master and patriarch. When interacting with his uncle, Finn's satanic nature manifests as the rebellious son. He dons a Mephistopheles mask, is often depicted with cloven hooves, a telltale sign of the devil, is literally cast out of the catwalks above the puppet theater by Philip, and, putting the final nail in the metaphor's metaphorical coffin, paints a picture depicting himself as the devil, torturing Philip in hell. Having established his allegorical identity, Carter reveals her message in the final act of the play after Finn smashes the swan, an allegory for rape as a tool for patriarchal control, among other things. And Philip leaves the toy shop for a model boat convention. So what happens when God's cast-out son marches back into heaven while God is out of the house? We would hope that he would dismantle the system of hierarchical oppression established by his father, himself being a victim of those systems. But Carter wants to show us something about the way patriarchy perpetuates itself. With Philip gone, Finn, the next most vocal male in the household, the rebel, takes his place as patriarch. The change in Finn's character is drastic and sudden. Abruptly, his dancing days are over and he's ready to start having babies with Melanie, who hates this prospect, intuiting that will imprison her in domesticity. The implication Carter is making is that rebellions against hierarchical oppression often end with one of the rebels taking the reins of the same system that oppressed them. This is doubly true of the system of patriarchy. Finn, offered a chance to sit at the head of the table, to use the father mug, declares that he's come of age. He benevolently tells Melanie that, "I shall respect your youth and innocence, Melanie," end quote, implying that her youth and innocence are his to protect or take. Carter takes time to establish Finn and Philip as an allegory for God and the devil, one of the most famous father-son relationships in all of Western history, in order to demonstrate that on a broader scale, patriarchy perpetuates itself by offering victimized men the power and validation that their oppressors once wielded. Carter uses this extended allegory in order to sublimate this critique into her text. We've explored the way that Carter has used allegories and myths as tools to embed complex ideas and critiques deep within her prose. But this is when things start to get really wild. Heroes and Villains is Carter's first novel that can be looked at as a form of literary critique, rather than simply a novel with a complex set of intertextual and mythic superstructures. In this novel, Carter engages with what one scholar calls a generic framework of what will be called a dystopian romance, as a vehicle for Carter's didactic allegory of the relationship between sexes, that uses the utopian ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau in order to rewrite the myth of the fall as it structures Western representations of the social order and sexual difference. End quote. In other words, she's combining structures from the dystopian and romance genres as a platform to make various points about gender relations and Rousseau's notion of the noble savage. Similarly to the way that Honey Buzzard is meant to problematize the power that manipulating social constructions can afford, a number of characters in Heroes and Villains are concerned with the practice of constructing or deconstructing myths as a means of social control. Carter utilizes the setting of post-apocalyptic dystopia to strip the context out of the world. Words have ceased to describe facts and now stood for only ideas or memories. End quote. In order to better examine the act of constructing a new myth, in this post-cultural world, Carter sets up three camps in constant opposition with each other. The Professors, a system of patriarchal hierarchy led by men studying the arcology of social theory. The Barbarians, nomadic tribes of raiders and foragers, and the Out People, mutant wasteland dwellers who had forfeited their social identities. End quote. The antagonistic relationship that Carter sets up between these tribes is primarily perpetuated through the myths that each society constructs about the others. The Professors disseminate the myth that barbarians slit the bellies of the women after they've raped them and sew up cats inside. End quote. Conversely, the Barbarians believe that, quote, the Professor women sprout sharp teeth in their private parts to bite off the genitalia of young men. End quote. Note Carter's inscription of the vagina dentata myth as an underlying castration anxiety that the Professors pose the phallically aggressive barbarians. This basic level of myth operates roughly on the same level as her previous two novels have. What sets this one apart, what makes it remarkably different, is that now there are characters within the text clever enough to remark on and even manipulate these new mythologies. This reflects a drastic shift in Carter's style towards a more philosophical, epistemological play of themes. Rather than building mythic superstructures, she's using her characters to comment on and problematize mythic construction. Her primary tools in this new trade are the relationships between Jewel, Donnelly, and Marianne. Donnelly is an ex-professor who's gone to live as the leader of a phallic cult that he invented in order to control the barbarians. The primary topic of conversation in Melanie's first conversation with him is how he has achieved control through, quote, the ruling passion, end quote, fear, and, quote, religion being a social necessity, end quote. This sets Donnelly up as a proto-patriarch and mythmaker. His cult's primary symbol is a sawdust-stuffed snake in a cage. Carter suggests that behind the obscuring myth, the symbol at the heart of his phallic cult is lifeless and impotent. Donnelly's ultimate goal, however, is revealed in one disturbing conversation he has with Marianne about the role of religion in the wasteland. Quote, I've often thought of grooming Jewel for some kind of mythopoeic role. He could be the messiah of the Yahoos, end quote. This passage reveals one of the most foremost themes in the novel, the mythological state of Jewel, the pseudo-chief of the barbarians, as he struggles against being transformed completely into a sign of the Messiah. In this fashion, Marianne, the protagonist, and Jewel's unwilling bride, reinscribes Donnelly's attempts to mythologize Jewel. On some level, she and Donnelly share a cultural connection. They've both lived among the professors, can read and write, and have read similar works of social philosophy, most notably that of Rousseau. Carter sees Rousseau's idea that humans who have never been exposed to a culture exist in a state of ideal purity as a naive claim. And in many ways, this novel asserts that in a post-cultural world, humanity no longer has any tool to repress its id. Both Marianne and Donnelly see the power of myth as a tool of control and are intelligent enough to manipulate it for their own ends, as evidenced by Marianne's claim at the end of the novel, I'll be the tiger lady and rule with a rod of iron, end quote. Marianne fully intends to mythologize herself as a phallic woman in the reinscription of patriarchal control. She is identified with her myth-making oppressor. Most striking about her character, though, is her inability to separate Jewel from this mythic construction. Countless times she cannot, and does not want to, see his face for shadows or the mask of his war paint. During their wedding, she thinks, his appearance was abstracted from his body, and he was willfully reduced to sign language. He had become the sign of an idea of a hero, and she herself had been forced to impersonate the sign of a memory of a bride. but though she knew quite well she herself was only impersonating the sign, she could not tell whether Jewel was impersonating that other sign or had indeed become it." End quote. Indeed, Marianne, as the lens through which we experience the text, elevates Jewel's significance into a figure inseparable from the enormous torque of being at once myth and man. Carter draws on this binary tension so often within the text that Jewel can be seen as the literalized manifestation of the messianic myth. This thread can be traced from start to finish and is the central thought experiment the story is built around. In this way, Heroes and Villains is a more philosophical exploration of a single premise, the construction of myths as reality-shaping tools, disguised as a dystopian romance, than it is a novel concerned with problematizing socio-cultural myths, like her previous works. Having teased out the way Carter weaves myth into her first three novels, the distinction between the first two and the third is quite clear. Carter primarily explores the way myths can be damaging in her first two novels. In this way, she is engaged in demythologizing on the small scale of problematizing patriarchal and misogynistic realities by tracing their roots in what Carter calls the lumber room of Western European imagination. End quote. Yet she begins to engage the work of demythologizing on a much deeper level in Heroes and Villains, by examining why we create myths in the first place, and what they really are. Instead of decapitating mythological weeds, as she has been doing, she arms herself with various theories of social philosophy and goes for the metaphorical roots of all myths. In this way, she engages for the first time the methods she will employ for the rest of her career that will make her writing indispensable in the quest for year one. Thank you.